Perfect. The answer is no, and we're gonna finish up. I should probably preface this with saying I'm not an investor in any of these three guys, so I'm not gonna give any softball questions. I don't invest based on vibes. Exactly. I want to do intros a little bit differently than what you might usually do. So instead of spending a minute talking about what your project is, just shortly one line, who you are, what you're working on, and then can you give an example of why archaic L1s are bad? So one example of something that does not make sense on an L1. I guess I'll start if that's okay. So I'm Mass, Rain and Coffee on Twitter, research partner at Mave 11. One example I would give is that an Ethereum is going down a roll-up-centric roadmap, but Ethereum from the start is not built for roll-ups. So I guess that's one example. Do you want to go next?
I don't think this one. Hold on.
All right, is this on now? Oh, we're so back. Alrighty guys, Smokey from Berachain. We turn liquidity into security and use it to power applications building on the chain. In terms of why I think the L1s right now are archaic is that I think they offer no fundamental value to the applications built on top of them and are generally undifferentiated.
Does this work? Oh, fuck yeah. Hey, what's going on? I'm Banksy. Burnt to Banksy, building XION. We are trying to remove the aspect of crypto for crypto applications. One aspect of, I guess, L1s that are archaic is that we are hyper-optimizing unused block space.
Hi, my name is Stanford. I'm the CEO or co-founder of Initia. What we're trying to do is basically build a system for interwoven rollups and make it really easy for different rollups to basically connect with each other. And I guess along those lines, one thing that, for the reason why existing L1s are kind of archaic is that they don't really take into account a lot of the interoperability aspects across different ecosystems.
All right, perfect. Thanks for the.
Can we get an introduction here?
We probably should. Woof woof. Woof woof. There we go.
Woof.
Okay, maybe to get us started, let's sort of categorize the type of L1s I think you guys are specifically building, because I think there is a little bit of a difference, right? You have a lot of generalizable ones that are go build whatever, but it seems like that's not really a thing anymore as much. Like you have to be differentiating, at least have some sort of aspect that is unique. I guess with Stan here, it's like you're building a modern settlement layer. Is that correct? Like how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think while we do have an L1, we also have a bunch of L2s that live on top of it, and we kind of built this hybrid system where there's both of these. So it's a little bit different from your typical L1. We're kind of more focused on basically thinking about the L2 layer, how value can accrue to these L2s, which is usually economic activity on the applications themselves, and how this value should drive back down to the L1 and vice versa. How can the L1 itself help the L2s basically make it easier to onboard users, easier to move liquidity or assets across each other, and as well as provide some potentially incentives to the individual application builders themselves.
Appreciate it. And Banksy, you're building for the non-existent consumer?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. How do you do that?
By trying to remove all aspects of crypto.
All right. So is this abstraction? Should we think of it as
That's a great term, yeah.
Is that a term you guys use?
Yeah, no, we use that heavily.
Oh, okay. And when I say abstraction, is that like chain abstraction, like multi-chain thing? Or
It doesn't matter.
All right. So with no crypto, and then we crypto on the back end.
And then we just kind of figure it out.
All right. That makes sense. And bears, I guess.
There are bears.
Bears makes sense. That's good. Maybe to.
I thought this was going to be such a big brain panel.
No, we're getting there. We're getting there. Let's start with the basic questions.
Very serious.
Let's start with the basic questions. Just one question I had specifically around sort of getting new apps and new developers to come. Like, what changes are they asking for? Because I'm assuming they're going to be. Some of them are like, yo, I can't build what I want to build on Ethereum. Like, what are they asking for? Is that a reason why you're building specifically what you're building right now?
Yeah, I think for us, sort of what I talked about a little bit earlier was that right now, builders have very little reason to exist on one chain versus the other, right? In some cases, there are these grant programs, and it's like, hey, we'll throw money at you, we'll give you some fish, we will not teach you how to fish, and then hopefully you'll live for 3 months or die before raising a VC round, right? Depending on the type of protocol. It's unfortunate. It's kind of shitty. It's an era of the past, in my opinion. It's a relic that really should be abolished. The part that's been interesting for us, and I think that has been well recognized on Berachain, is that proof of liquidity is really built to allow the chain to direct value value that's generated or incentives, block rewards that are generated into the applications and the ecosystem in service of those in terms of decreasing their customer acquisition cost, increasing their capital efficiency, and ultimately ending up in the hands of users and dApps, right? So for us, I think the number one question that we've had a lot of people ask is like, how does this chain make my life easier? How does it solve a problem for me? And a lot of times that problem is like capital acquisition and bootstrapping and sort of initial activation energy before one can sort of start breaking out.
You want to answer that, Banksy?
Yeah, what was the question? Sorry, I totally sent it.
What changes are apps or developers asking for?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I would say the apps that we target are the people whose audience is just not crypto. And so pretty much anything to make crypto disappear is typically what we get, whether that be on and offboarding easier, whether that be more social or different types of logins, or maybe for a power user, some more security metrics. But yeah, we kind of take a different audience, I'd say.
Stan, anything on this?
Yeah, I think for us, there's like two categories. The first category is like the developers who are making these applications, right? And there's like a few things that a lot of applications will typically expect. For example, maybe native USDC or like direct Oracle access or bridging, right? A lot of this stuff, currently you still have to talk to each individual partner or each individual team and kind of convince them. If you want native USDC, you probably have to become very large, like Optimism or maybe Arbitrum or whatever, and convince Circle to deploy it native USDC or pay them, right? And that is just like, for most projects, not something that's possible, not economically possible, and in general, maybe engineering-wise, it's not possible as well. So those are the types of things that we want to be able to provide users as well as developers from day one. From the user's perspective, I think teams like Rabby and other types of wallets and other types of front-end services are doing really well to mask the underlying, I guess, like infrastructure fragmentation itself and the infrastructure problem. What we want to do in addition to that is basically solve this problem from like the infrastructure layer itself, kind of solve this problem not only from like the architecture stack as well as the infrastructure stack, but also from the product stack as well. So that's why we're kind of building this whole comprehensive system in one little package.
Appreciate it. Last non-technical questions, then we can get down the deep end, if you guys are ready for that. All the new L2s, L1s, are generally giving away a shit ton of money to get users and developers especially. This seems to be pretty expensive. Is there not another way, or is that just the way you have to go down to get any users or any developers to come build on you?
I mean, I think if you have to give money away, you kind of suck. So I'm very bearish on most chains that actually take that approach. I think that a lot of airdrops are also conducted in a very inefficient and kind of like just stupid manner. And that people view them as customer acquisition costs, but I really think that they don't serve as a real acquisition of customers. They serve as anything as sort of acquisition of like sentiment or overall feeling towards a project. In most cases, you have maybe a couple hundred people that give a shit about it after, and then the vast majority of people that end up churning, right? And you'll have some mid-thousand number in terms of user acquisition costs, if you want to call it that. I think in many, many more cases, what actually matters is being able to demonstrate sort of like skin in the game to an ecosystem. And there's a number of different ways that you can take this, right? Our approach towards this was on one hand just working very closely with builders from the early days and making sure that on one hand a strong community was being formed and people actually saw a chance at distribution, which I think is one of the most important things in the market right now, especially noting the non-existent consumer. But I think that beyond that, also being able to identify a really high bar of talent out the gates, because I think that like attracts like, strong builders attract strong builders, and if your ecosystem is a bunch of grifts on day one, then you're going to get a bunch of grifts. But if your ecosystem is a bunch of fairly curated, high potential builders that are selected from whatever other worlds you might have come from in the past, that tends to have its own set of network effects, right? So for us, a lot of that was also accomplished through something called Build-A-Bera, which was like sort of our take on this, not even quite Atomic Labs, but somewhere between Atomic Labs and YC type model, where every sort of few months we'd have a number of strong companies with getting a lot of assistance in terms of incubation, go-to-market strategy, fundraising help from the foundation, such that groups who are building stuff that we could really see being foundational and just 0 to 1 on Berachain had the opportunity to break out of the pack and then inspire a number of other ones alongside them.
Yeah, I think the grant program is really, really beneficial if you have absolutely nothing else to offer. And I think it's also really beneficial as an example for me when I give an example of like how badly things have worked out in the past. I think like Starbucks is a very great example and a bunch of others like that. And I think it's obviously been shown to not work. And I think like Smokey has some pretty good thoughts on this as well, especially on Twitter. But yeah, to the point, like it sucks, and if you got to do it, you suck.
So you said grants were good, or?
No, I said the exact opposite of that.
Okay, that's good. Because I was wondering, because you do get a lot of grant explorers, so.
Yeah, they don't work well.
No, exactly.
Unless you have nothing else to offer, in which case, I mean, they work phenomenally.
Then you got to do something.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Anything on this, Stan, or not?
Yeah, I think all three of us are probably relatively aligned on this. If your only thing that you can offer is just like, come build our chain and we'll give you some tokens or we'll give you some dollars, I don't think that's really a good like business model in general. I think you kind of bring interesting projects itself into the ecosystem by bringing like a few handful of like native grown dApps itself, right? And then like kind of the ecosystem expands from there. So if you look at like Arbitrum or Optimism, Arbitrum did really well early on because of GMX, right? And then like everybody started building a GLP wrapper or some sort of product around our GMX itself. Optimism was similar with like Velodrome, Base was similar with like Aerodrome, etc. You kind of build some of these interesting products that people actually use that gain traction, and then people kind of grow on top of them. And so rather than giving grants itself or like having the foundation give grants, we kind of encourage these really interesting projects. We provide all the support that they need. Our system is also a little bit different in the sense that we have an L1 and a bunch of L2s. So like what can the L1 do for these L2 projects themselves, right? So one of the things is we've built an incentive mechanism that basically aligns the ecosystem by giving incentives to the applications that do the best. And this is like algorithmically or like automatically distributed to individually to each one of these products themselves. And one of the things we kind of realized when we looked at some of these other retroactive grant programs and things like that is that what sometimes happens is these teams receive, let's say, a bunch of tokens as grants, right? But they never end up in the hands of the users themselves, right? Like the product succeeded because it was the users, not to some degree the team as well, obviously. But you want to bring value back to the users. So instead of having like these grants go straight into the treasury where the users will never be able to see it, we have like made it very explicit in the sense that there's no middleman. We want the end rewards or like the incentives themselves that are given by the chain to actually accrue to the end user itself. And so like you could think like a lot of these end users, they'll get some of these token rewards and things like that, and they'll just dump it, right? And then you kind of just farm it, you know, farm for like a month or whatever, a week, and then leave the ecosystem. And so what we want to do to prevent that kind of stuff is to impose some sort of like locking or some sort of like mechanism that encourages users to continuously use the application itself. So you kind of vest these rewards as you maintain these app level KPIs. And so that's like kind of the economic system that we've built to get around this.
Appreciate the nuanced take on that. Let's jump off the
You're welcome.
Jump into the deep end of the well. Let's maybe start talking a little bit about some technical stuff, hey boys? I would love to hear your takes on sort of virtual machines a little bit, because as an L1, I think in your case a little bit different, Stan, but at least for Smokey here and Banksy, picking a VM seems like a pretty big choice. It kind of constrains yourself to a certain section of developers. It's kind of hard to sort of upgrade things on an L1 because there's just so much more sort of running cogs in the sort of machine. So we'd love to hear your takes on VMs, how do you pick one, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. I think for us, we try to keep things relatively vanilla in that sense, with room for optionality in the future. Berachain, while it is an L1, it's actually the L1 that's about as close as one can get to Ethereum in terms of EVM compatibility, in that we actually go past EVM compatibility and into identicality, in that there's full EIP equivalence, the opcodes are all the same. If you have a contract on mainnet, you're able to move it to Berachain. If you have middleware, et cetera, on Berachain, or on mainnet, you're able to move it to Berachain, because you can actually run unmodified execution clients for Berachain in the same way as you would for ETH, whether that's Geth, Reth, Aragon, Nethermind, whatever it might be. We figured that this actually allows us to really get the best of both worlds, because on one hand, we have a full EVM identical execution layer, allowing us to have access to the liquidity, the developers, sort of I'd say the mindshare and the developer tooling of the EVM, which in itself, especially the dev tooling side, I think is massive in terms of reduction to friction, where I think one of the hardest things in a new ecosystem is actually getting people off the ground and giving them some impetus to build and some desire to do something there. And if they're blocked at every point in the way by not being able to use hard hat or whatever it might be, then you end up with a pretty rough state of things. On the other hand, we've basically rolled our own execution client called Beacon Kit, which allows us to actually use Comet BFT consensus under the hood for single slot finality. So hopefully getting a little bit of the best of both worlds there in terms of EVM on the top, a little bit of Cosmos/Comet on the bottom, which makes life a lot easier from a transaction ordering point of view, from a ridging point of view, etc. And then a nice side effect of us being EVM identical means that while Berachain itself at the moment and for the foreseeable foreseeable future only supports CVM, there's actually a lot of flexibility in what people would want to build in terms of L2s to Berachain. So one could quite easily build a move VM L2, which is in the works right now with some of our friends. One could build an SVM L2, etc. So we see that as extensions of the chain in a world, as opposed to the base layer itself.
So what you're saying is that we do not need more L1s, we need more L2s?
No, I think most L2s are actually parasitic, and I think that those are actually pretty problematic. I think that the guys at Initia, among others, are taking pretty interesting approaches to do so, but I think that if you want optionality around the VM, you can do so with L2s, right? But I don't think that everyone needs that.
But isn't the L1 also parasitic to the apps on it, to some extent?
Not Berachain, because the whole system of Berachain is actually the value primarily goes towards the apps and its users, right? The whole thesis of proof of liquidity is that every time a block is produced, those block rewards are being distributed to the applications across the chain and their LPs or their users for the most part, right? So we actually see part of our edge, or part of the reason that we're excited about what's being built here, is that we are symbiotic with applications, not parasitic towards them.
But I guess there's examples where you'd probably want to give apps like some control. Like one thing is ASS, like application-specific sequencing. You probably, the funny acronym, I know. You probably do want to give apps some control. Is that kind of antithesis towards the L1 thesis, that you want to give away some customizability, some optionality to the applications building there?
Yeah, I guess for us specifically, we definitely love ASS, I guess, in some sense. We want applications themselves to basically have their own control around sequencing, to have their own control in general along the tech stack itself. And we do believe, and we kind of built this architecture with the fact that all applications themselves, they should accrue the economic value that they generate from the applications themselves. They should accrue it, right? It shouldn't be accrued to the L1 in our belief. The L1 is kind of just like an orchestration layer, or a layer that kind of routes the necessary infrastructure to all these L2s, whether it's Oracle data, whether it's like bridging, etc. So we've kind of like built this in mind. These applications, they can run their own sequencers or run their own like decentralized sequencer, or use a shared sequencer or whatever. And they're able to use whatever type of gas token that they would like, right? So they can use their own token, native token. They can use a shitcoin. They can use USDC. They can use the Initia native token. But we're like in the business in some sense of building cheap block space, right? So we don't think like gas fees themselves will accrue much value in the future, right? And we kind of view as like, while one chain may have multiple applications, we don't see the entire world of applications living on one chain itself. And so that kind of necessitates the fact that there will be multiple chains. And so when that happens, we kind of want these applications to kind of group up themselves together, or maybe even launch their own app chain / app rollup and accrue all the value to themselves. And I think that's just free market in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, two very good answers to a problem. So I appreciate that. Banksy, you said in the beginning that you want to remove all crypto, at least for part of the aspects of.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah. So do you at that point care about stuff like decentralization? Like, do you care about how
I fucking hate decentralization. That's a great question.
All right. Do you just want to stay like a single database?
I just don't think it works. So. Yep.
Yeah, I mean it's faster, right?
Yeah. I love centralization. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's faster.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like we actually need to sacrifice decentralization if we want people to use products, or if we want products. You can quote me on that, by the way.
All right. I appreciate that. I mean, it's an interesting take for sure. I'd say a lot of people would probably say something opposite. I say like, yo, it does matter. I don't know if you have a take on that or not.
No. I think he's spitting more truth than most would be willing to say, right? Like, I think that there's a lot to be said about decentralization, right? I think on one hand, there is a point at which it becomes like chaotic, and you actually get to the point of decentralization where progress stops occurring. Perhaps in some ideal world or perfect system, that march continues, but I think that the majority of practical examples we've seen, like study Ethereum, study Cosmos, a lot of that has turned into an absolute shit show, right? Solana, on the other hand, I know it's popular to dick ride Solana right now, but they're a very product and engineering-led organization from what I can see, right? On the other hand, right, I do think that both from a regulatory point of view and from an ethos of the space point of view, there's like value in decentralization. But the bigger thing when it comes to like ASS, et cetera, is I think that like those applications need like users or people to give a shit about like that sequencing. Like there needs to be some meaningful value, I presume, to be captured in the first place for that level of nuance to actually matter at some point, in my opinion, right? Like, is ASS going to matter for an app with 1,000 users that are casually using on a daily basis with a couple hundred in volume apiece? I'm a little bit more skeptical. Is it going to matter for stuff at scale? I think entirely fair.
All right, I appreciate
I'm
that.
also pro decentralization. I don't know if we picked up on the sarcasm there.
No, I definitely did.
Okay.
I definitely did. I do understand sarcasm. Thank you very
It's
much.
actually, it's. I don't think it's inherently difficult. I think it's one of those things that are extremely over-indexed, and I think you can, to the point of like Cosmos, and I think to the point of Cosmos and Ethereum. I can probably speak more to Cosmos, but I think you kind of lost this North Star and you lost this like core group of people. But I think there was a benefit to Cosmos of having that core group of people being successful applications who kind of pioneered the way, and politics always gets involved. I mean, look at SushiSwap. It's probably another prime example of that. But there is way, like, I think inherently, and that's why we're all here, to be able to provide like the same ethos and the same security and the same speed without actually having to, do this whole bullshit, triangle decentralization. I don't think that's inherently the same as it was in like 17, 18.
How do you pay for that then? The decentralization. Like, you have to pay your validator something, yeah?
Yeah.
Like, so it's more of a question, like, how would is
What?
let's take Solana. Let's take Solana for example. Paying a shit ton of Sol tokens to their validators. I guess they're hoping eventually MEV is going to be so large on some of the applications that they're not paying the validators quite a lot of MEV. Is that seems like only a few ones get that lucky, right? I think if you look at most of the Cosmos chains out there right now, they're not that lucky. Like, there isn't that much stuff happening on most of those applications. There's not a lot of MEV, and they're still paying the validators to run the software, right? You still have to do that. Do you have any takes on this, or like, how do you get to that equilibrium? Because it seems quite far away.
Yeah, you just be the fucking best.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But nobody has done that, eh?
Yet.
All right. Are you gonna be the one that comes the best? Banksy?
Your words, dude, not mine.
Okay. We'll see. Any takes on this, Stan?
I think you pay for it basically on two factors. One is you just like spit out tokens in terms of emissions if you're like an L1 chain or like some sort of chain with validator set. The other is you pay for it either in like speed or latency, right? Like, obviously they might not follow the same slope of curve versus on like decentralization versus like speed/latency, but like all chains and all like, let's say, distributed ledgers follow some sort of like curve, right? And so like the more decentralized you go, it's necessary that in some sense you lose some of like the speed, right? And this is like happens in Cosmos, but like Tendermint and like the peer-to-peer problems that arise. What you can kind of do is, like, as I think Banksy mentioned, is that in the beginning, like these small chains, you probably don't need to be as decentralized as like maybe the world's financial system, right? And so it really depends on the specific product itself and the stage of the product. And then in some sense, you can even argue that for some of these chains that do have like or have inflation that exceeds the value that is generated by economic activity or MEV, if they're like interesting products and people are actually using them, you can kind of view it as like a subsidy, right? Like early on, when you have like startups, they subsidize whether it's like marketing budget, whatever. But you need to eventually return to a state where you are at least breaking even or hopefully making a profit. But whether that is like that will happen or not, that depends on like the product itself. Is it really interesting enough of a product, especially if you live on a standalone chain?
Anyone on that? Nah. All right. One thing I would love to ask you, Banksy, because you sort of mentioned like the abstraction, or I mentioned abstraction, and you said it was a good word.
Your words, not mine.
You're my words, and now yours as well. One thing I would love to ask about, I'm assuming that means a lot of integrated sort of experiences. Yeah. I'm assuming you're building a lot of the base layer things yourself. I would also have all you guys take on that. Like, it seems quite needed at this point to build a ton of stuff from the very beginning to actually get the first set of users. Because otherwise you run into like, oh shit, we have to pay devs to come build stuff here. So we'll actually take a sort of building integrated experiences into the chain itself.
I think that's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. I'm going to take the integrated from the sense of like the actual chain abstraction aspect, which is like, I think we're working with both of these guys for chain abstraction. We're building something interesting on Berachain, which is like, I think it's a DEX that you can't sell at, and so you can only buy. I don't think we've ever talked about that yet, but yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I love this.
I'm pretty sure someone's building that, but like effectively using chain abstraction, so it's literally like credit card, buy, this asset, and just have fun watching it, soar. And not only do you not know.
Wait, sorry, is this a honeypot Dex?
What? No, dude, it's like it's up only. Like
this is good tech.
Can we put Bitcoin on this deck?
we can fucking do anything you want, dog.
Dude, that's
We're
but
so
like,
back.
we're so back, dude. But like, with that being said, right, and like obviously being like chain abstraction with you guys, like, I don't think we actually care about especially a lot of this L1 conversation, because at the end of the day, like, I just want to make sure that products are usable. Whether it's like up only perpetually, or something really cool that we end up doing with Initia, or like we did something with Injective like a month ago and Neutron, and there's a lot of cool shit to be done, especially with the aspect of like, hey, what happens if we take away all of the A, friction, but B, like crypto bullshit, and we just have fun with it. And so I think when you look at a lot of that, and you look at this kind of concept of integration, and it's so easy because you have a lot of teams who, number one, want to have fun, and then number two, like to work with awesome people, right? So it's like whether you're actually paying devs or like there's members of the community who are like, hey, we know that we're working with Union and we can get to Berachain, we should do something really fucking stupid. Things like that are really exciting, and I think that's a really big power driver for this kind of like integration thesis.
Yeah, I do like the point of like fun, because it seems like we've over-indexed for over a decade on like hyper decentralization, hyper technical reasons for doing X, Y, and Z. So I very like that. A little bit of vibes would be quite useful.
We only invest off of vibes. I understand Maven 11 is not.
Yeah, clearly not a vibes-based investor. Not yet. Maybe something cool.
Yeah, have fun reading The Intelligent Investor, dog.
Yep. That's how they look. Any takes on this integrated thing? Because I think you guys are quite.
Yeah. I think that on our side, it's more about we think that certain things have some value as being part of the base layer, similar to a point that Sam was making earlier about like some baseline value accruing to the chain, right? Because in Berachain, the block rewards token basically earns a portion of the fees that are generated by the network and the applications building on top of it if they are receiving emissions. So kind of how I talked about like basically the chain is spitting out its emissions towards apps on it as determined by liquidity providers. There's also some portion of that that's going back towards the holders of that token, right? The whole idea of like some equivalent exchange, full alchemist, metal alchemist style, right? It's like you did some work, you get some portion of the upside here. And with that, there's basically a DEX, a perps exchange, and a lending market built into the chain. That's like our take on integration, if you will, right? We don't think that we don't think that you should go and build the whole world and take up all the space, but we also think that the majority of chains end up with like 6 months of Ponzi bullshit where you just have a bunch of Uniswap forks, Aave forks, like GMX forks, whatever it is, that are all like really badly done, and encourage actually like sort of a low standard of product, right? So to the same point that I was mentioning earlier, I think you go a long way by actually setting the bar a little bit higher for the ecosystem, even if that makes you a little bit of a Fed chain to start, right? But we think about integration in that sense in terms of some degree of tangible value capture and some degree of bar setting that allows the rest of the ecosystem to basically grow as a result of it.
All right, I think we're running out of time. Let's keep the schedule on track. And I guess the vibes are back. Thank you so much to Smokey,
so back.
Banksy,
Thank you.
and Stan as well.
Thanks, Mads.